The rain hammered against the cracked pavement like bullets, each drop exploding into 1,000 smaller pieces before disappearing into the darkness. Madison Turner pressed herself deeper into the alley's shadows, her torn dress clinging to her bruised body like a second skin made of pain and humiliation. Blood trickled from her split lip, mixing with tears she refused to acknowledge as weakness. The metallic taste filled her mouth, a constant reminder of what had just happened. 3 hours earlier, she'd been serving tables at Romano's Italian restaurant, her smile genuine despite the exhaustion weighing down her shoulders. College tuition didn't pay itself, and every tip mattered. She'd worked double shifts for weeks, her fingers permanently stained with coffee and her feet screaming in protest against the cheap shoes she couldn't afford to replace. But tonight felt different. Tonight, everything had gone wrong. Vincent Romano, Jr., the owner's son, had been drinking heavily at table 12, his expensive suit wrinkled and his eyes glazed with alcohol and something darker. Madison had served his family's restaurant faithfully for 2 years, always professional, always respectful. She knew Vincent watched her sometimes, his gaze lingering too long, but she'd learned to navigate around men like him. She thought she was safe in the familiar walls of Romano's, surrounded by other staff and regular customers. When Vincent cornered her in the storage room, his breath reeking of whiskey and entitlement, Madison had tried to stay calm. She'd dealt with drunk customers before, but this felt different. His hands grabbed at her uniform, his voice slurred with privilege and expectation. When she pushed him away, explaining firmly that she needed to return to her tables, his face twisted into something ugly and dangerous. The first slap stunned her into silence. The second one sent her stumbling backward into shelves lined with canned tomatoes and olive oil. Vincent's voice turned vicious, calling her names that cut deeper than his hands ever could. He accused her of leading him on, of thinking she was too good for him, of being nothing more than a poor college girl who should be grateful for his attention. Madison fought back with everything she had, her nails leaving scratches across his cheek, her knee finding its target between his legs. But Vincent was stronger, and when his friends Marcus and Tony appeared in the doorway, she knew she was outnumbered. They held her while Vincent delivered punishment for her defiance, each blow calculated to hurt without leaving marks that would be easily visible. Afterward, they dragged her through the restaurant's back exit, past the dumpsters filled with spoiled food and broken dreams. Vincent's final words echoed in her ears as they left her crumpled in the alley. Nobody will believe a scholarship kid over a Romano. Remember your place. Now, as rain washed the blood from her face, Madison wondered if he was right. The police station seemed impossibly far away, and even if she made it there, who would listen to her story? The Romanos owned half the businesses in this neighborhood, their influence reaching deep into City Hall and beyond. She was just another struggling student, invisible and expendable. Thunder rolled overhead like God's own anger, and Madison closed her eyes, feeling smaller than she'd ever felt in her 21 years of life. The sound of motorcycle engines cutting through the storm made her look up. 3 bikes emerged from the rain like mechanical ghosts, their riders barely visible beneath black leather and chrome. Madison's first instinct was to run, but her body refused to cooperate. She'd heard stories about the motorcycle club that operated on the outskirts of town, whispers of violence and lawlessness that made decent people lock their doors after dark. The lead rider killed his engine and swung off his bike with fluid grace. Even in the dim light, Madison could see he was tall and broad-shouldered, his leather jacket bearing patches she couldn't quite make out through the rain. A bandana covered the lower half of his face, but his eyes were visible beneath dark hair plastered to his forehead by the storm. He approached slowly, his hands visible and non-threatening. Behind him, his companions remained by their bikes, engines cooling in the sudden quiet. Madison tried to scramble backward, but pain shot through her ribs, forcing a gasp from her lips. "Easy there," the man said, his voice surprisingly gentle for someone who looked like he could tear apart a grown man with his bare hands. "I'm not going to hurt you." Madison wanted to believe him, but trust felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. "Stay away from me," she whispered, though the words came out weaker than she'd intended. The stranger stopped about 6 feet away, then slowly reached for something behind his back. Madison's heart hammered against her bruised ribs, certain he was reaching for a weapon. Instead, he pulled off his leather jacket, revealing a white t-shirt that somehow looked pristine despite the rain. "You're hurt," he observed, stating the obvious with such matter-of-fact gentleness that Madison felt tears threatening again. "And you're cold." Without waiting for permission, he stepped closer and draped his jacket around her shoulders. The leather was warm from his body heat and smelled like motor oil cigarettes, and something indefinably masculine that should have frightened her but somehow didn't. The jacket was massive on her small frame, enveloping her like armor against the world. "My name's Jake," he said, crouching down to her eye level. "Jake Morrison, and you look like someone who's had about the worst night possible." Madison clutched the jacket tighter around herself, feeling safer than she had since this nightmare began. "Why are you helping me?" Jake's eyes, she noticed, were a startling shade of blue, almost electric in their intensity. "Because someone should have helped you before it got this bad." The simple honesty in his voice broke something loose inside Madison's chest. She found herself telling him everything about Vincent, about Romano's, about the beating and the threats. Jake listened without interruption, his jaw tightening with each detail she shared. When she finished, Jake stood and turned to his companions. "Marcus, call Doc Reynolds. Tell him we're bringing someone who needs patching up." He looked back at Madison. "Think you can ride behind me? I know someone who can help." Madison had never been on a motorcycle in her life, but staying in this alley felt like surrendering to everything Vincent Romano had said about her place in the world. She nodded, accepting Jake's hand as he helped her to her feet. As they rode through the storm toward whatever sanctuary Jake had in mind, Madison felt something she hadn't experienced in hours: hope. The outlaw's jacket shielded her from more than just the rain. It wrapped her in the promise that she wasn't as alone as she'd believed. Dr. Elizabeth Reynolds had seen plenty of patients in her 40 years of practice, but she'd never gotten used to the ones who arrived on the back of Jake Morrison's motorcycle. Her small clinic operated in the gray areas between legal and necessary, serving people who couldn't or wouldn't go to traditional hospitals. Tonight was no different. Madison sat on the examination table, Jake's jacket still draped around her shoulders like a talisman. Dr. Reynolds worked with practiced efficiency, cleaning wounds and assessing damage while maintaining a gentle bedside manner that had earned her the trust of both society's outcasts and its victims. 3 cracked ribs, facial bruising, and some nasty cuts, the doctor reported, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun that somehow remained perfect despite the late hour. "Nothing that won't heal, but you're going to be sore for weeks." Jake paced the small room like a caged wolf, his anger barely contained beneath a veneer of calm. "Those bastards did a number on her, Doc." "Language, Jake," Dr. Reynolds chided automatically, though her tone held more affection than reproach. She'd been patching up members of the Iron Wolves motorcycle club for over a decade, ever since Jake's predecessor had saved her from a mugging outside her clinic. Madison watched the interaction with fascination. Nothing about this situation matched her preconceptions about motorcycle clubs. Dr. Reynolds treated Jake with the familiarity of an old friend, and Jake showed her the kind of respect Madison rarely saw men display toward women. "Madison," Dr. Reynolds said, turning her attention back to her patient, "you need to report this to the police. What happened to you was assault, and those men should face consequences." The weight of reality crashed back down on Madison's shoulders. "You don't understand. Vincent Romano's family owns half this city. His father plays golf with the police chief. They'll just say I was asking for it, working late alone with him." Jake stopped packing. "Vincent Romano did this." The way he said the name made Madison look up. There was something dangerous in Jake's voice, a quality that reminded her he was indeed the outlaw she'd first taken him for. "You know him." "Our paths have crossed," Jake said grimly. "The Romano family likes to think they run this town, but they've been stepping on the wrong people for years." Dr. Reynolds finished bandaging Madison's ribs and stepped back. "You should stay somewhere safe tonight. Do you have family, friends? Madison shook her head. Her parents lived 3 states away, and her college friends were just acquaintances who shared study groups and complained about professors. She'd built her life around work and school, leaving little room for the kind of relationships that mattered when everything fell apart. "She can stay at the clubhouse," Jake said without hesitation. "We've got spare rooms and nobody's going to mess with her there." The offer should have terrified Madison. Everything she'd been taught about motorcycle clubs warned her away from exactly this situation. But Jake had already shown her more kindness than anyone else in her life, and the alternative was returning to her empty apartment where Vincent Romano could find her. "I don't want to impose," she said weakly. Jake's smile transformed his face, softening the hard edges that made him look so dangerous. "Lady, after what you've been through tonight, imposing is the least of your worries." Dr. Reynolds packed medical supplies into a small bag. "Keep these wounds clean and dry. Take the pain medication I'm giving you, but don't mix it with alcohol. And Madison," she placed a motherly hand on Madison's shoulder, "don't let those men make you feel ashamed. What happened to you wasn't your fault." The ride to the Iron Wolves clubhouse took them through parts of the city Madison had never seen. Industrial buildings gave way to a residential area that had seen better decades, then to a compound surrounded by high fences and security cameras that wouldn't have looked out of place at a military installation. The clubhouse itself was a massive building that had once been a warehouse, converted into something between a fortress and a home. Motorcycles lined the parking area like chrome and steel sentries, and light spilled from windows that had been blocked from outside view. Inside, Madison was surprised by the warmth and organization. The main room featured comfortable furniture arranged around a massive television, pool tables, and a bar that looked like it belonged in an upscale restaurant. Pictures on the walls showed club members at various events, charity rides, community fundraisers, and group photographs that spoke of genuine brotherhood. "This isn't what I expected," Madison admitted as Jake led her through the common areas. "Most people have the wrong idea about us," Jake replied. "We're not saints, but we're not the devils the newspapers make us out to be either." A woman appeared from what looked like a kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She was probably 50, with graying brown hair and laugh lines around her eyes, but she carried herself with the confidence of someone who could handle herself in any situation. "Jake Morrison, you bringing home strays again?" she asked with mock severity. "Maggie, meet Madison. She's had a rough night and needs somewhere safe to stay." Maggie's expression immediately shifted to concern as she took in Madison's appearance. Despite Dr. Reynolds' efforts, the bruising was still visible, and Madison's torn clothing told its own story. "Oh, honey," Maggie said, her voice full of maternal warmth. "Come on, let's get you cleaned up and into some proper clothes." As Maggie led her toward the back of the building, Madison heard Jake talking quietly with several other men who had appeared from various rooms. Their voices were too low to make out words, but the tone was serious and planning-oriented. The room Maggie showed her to was surprisingly comfortable. A double bed with clean sheets, a dresser, and even a small television. Most importantly, it had a lock on the door and windows that had been reinforced with security bars. "The bathroom's right across the hall," Maggie explained, setting a stack of clothes on the bed. "These should fit you well enough. They belonged to my daughter before she moved to California." Madison fingered the soft cotton of a sweatshirt that looked like it had never been worn. "Why are you all being so kind to me? You don't even know me." Maggie sat on the edge of the bed, her expression thoughtful. "Honey, every woman in this world has been where you are at some point. Maybe not exactly the same situation, but we've all felt powerless and afraid. The difference is we found family here, people who have our backs no matter what." "But I'm not part of your family." "As of tonight, you are," Maggie said firmly. "Jake Morrison doesn't bring people here unless he's prepared to protect them with his life. And what Jake protects, we all protect." After Maggie left, Madison stood under the hot shower until the water ran cold, washing away the physical remnants of her assault while trying to process the emotional aftermath. The borrowed clothes fit perfectly, and for the first time since leaving Romano's restaurant, she felt human again. A soft knock on her door revealed Jake holding a plate of food and a cup of coffee. He'd changed out of his wet clothes into jeans and a clean t-shirt, and without his leather jacket and bandana, he looked younger and less intimidating. "Figured you might be hungry," he said, setting the plate on her dresser. "Maggie made enough food for an army as usual." Madison realized she was starving. The sandwich was perfect, thick slices of roast beef on homemade bread, with fresh vegetables that tasted like they'd come from an actual garden. The coffee was strong enough to wake the dead, and somehow exactly what she needed. "Jake," she said between bites, "what happens now? I can't hide here forever, and Vincent Romano isn't going to just forget about what happened." Jake's expression darkened. "Vincent Romano is going to learn that there are consequences for his actions, but that's not something you need to worry about right now." "What does that mean?" "It means," Jake said carefully, "that the Iron Wolves have a long memory and a strong sense of justice. Vincent thinks his family name protects him from accountability, but he's about to discover how wrong he is." Madison set down her coffee cup with trembling hands. "I don't want anyone to get hurt because of me." Jake knelt beside her chair, his blue eyes serious and intent. "Madison, What happened to you tonight was wrong on every level. If we let it slide, Vincent will do it again to someone else. Maybe someone who won't be as strong as you are. I don't feel strong. Lady, you fought back against 3 men who outweighed you by 100 pounds each. You survived. You're sitting here eating a sandwich and planning your next move instead of giving up. That's strength most people never find in themselves. His words settled something inside Madison's chest that had been loose and panicked since the assault began. For the first time, she began to believe that maybe she wasn't as powerless as Vincent Romano had made her feel. "What kind of consequences are we talking about?" she asked. Jake's smile held no warmth for the Romano family. The kind that will make sure Vincent never puts his hands on another woman without permission. Dawn broke gray and miserable over the city, but inside the Iron Wolves clubhouse, Madison woke to the smell of bacon and coffee strong enough to raise the dead. Her ribs ached with every breath, and her face felt like she'd been hit by a truck. But she was alive and safe, and surrounded by people who seemed genuinely committed to protecting her. The main room buzzed with quiet activity. Several club members sat around a large table covered with newspapers, laptops, and what looked like surveillance photographs. Jake stood at the center of it all, his voice low but carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that mattered. "Morning, sweetheart," Maggie called from the kitchen area. "How'd you sleep?" "Better than I expected," Madison admitted, accepting a plate piled high with eggs, bacon, and toast that looked homemade. "What's going on over there?" Maggie followed her gaze to the strategy session happening at the main table. "The boys are doing what they do best, gathering information and planning their next move." Madison watched Jake point to something on one of the laptops, while 2 other men nodded seriously. "Are they planning to hurt Vincent?" "Honey, there's a difference between justice and revenge," Maggie said, refilling Madison's coffee cup. "What happened to you was a crime, but if you go through normal channels, Vincent's family, money, and connections will make sure nothing happens to him. He'll get a slap on the wrist at most, and then he'll be free to do the same thing to the next girl who catches his eye." "So what's the alternative?" Before Maggie could answer, Jake approached their table. In daylight, Madison could see details she'd missed the night before. Jake was probably in his early 30s, with several small scars on his hands and arms that spoke of a life lived outside conventional boundaries. His dark hair was longer than current fashion dictated, and his blue eyes held the kind of intensity that suggested he'd seen more of the world's darkness than most people ever would. "Madison, we need to talk," he said, pulling up a chair beside her. "I've been making some calls, and the situation with the Romano family is more complicated than you might realize." Madison set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. "What do you mean?" Jake exchanged a glance with Maggie before continuing. Vincent Romano Jr. has been accused of assault before, 3 times in the past 5 years to be exact. Each time, the charges were dropped or dismissed before reaching trial. The blood drained from Madison's face. Other women. A hotel maid, a college student from the state university, and a waitress from another restaurant his family owns, Jake recited grimly. In each case, the women suddenly decided not to pursue charges after receiving visits from Romano family lawyers. Madison's hands began to shake. They were threatened. That's what it looks like. The Romano family has a pattern of covering up Vincent's behavior by intimidating his victims into silence. Which means, Maggie added gently, that if you try to report this through normal channels, you'll probably end up like those other women, scared into dropping charges and left to deal with the trauma alone. Madison pushed her plate away, nausea rolling through her stomach. So he just gets away with it. He gets to keep hurting people. Jake leaned forward, his voice intense but controlled. Not if we handle this differently. What are you proposing? Vincent Roman thinks he's untouchable because his family has money and connections. But money and connections can't protect you from everything. Jake's smile was sharp and dangerous. The Iron Wolves specialize in problems that can't be solved through conventional means. Madison looked around the room at the men still studying their documents and photographs. They looked like soldiers preparing for battle, and she was beginning to understand that in some ways, that's exactly what they were. I don't want anyone to get killed, she said quietly. Neither do we, Jake assured her. What we're talking about is justice, not murder. Vincent needs to face consequences for his actions, and he needs to understand that his victims aren't powerless. How? Jake's expression grew thoughtful. That depends on you. How far are you willing to go to make sure Vincent never hurts another woman? Madison thought about the 3 other women Jake had mentioned, women who had suffered what she'd suffered, only to be silenced and forgotten. She thought about Vincent's confident assertion that nobody would believe her over a Romano. She thought about going back to her old life, always looking over her shoulder, always wondering when Vincent might decide to finish what he'd started. What do you need me to do? Jake's smile transformed his face, and Madison caught a glimpse of the man he might have been in a different life. Someone who fought for justice, instead of against the system that was supposed to provide it. First, we gather evidence, real evidence that can't be dismissed or covered up. Then we make sure Vincent understands that his actions have consequences. Jake paused, studying Madison's face. But once we start down this path, there's no going back. The Romano family will know you were involved and they'll hold a grudge. Madison squared her shoulders despite the pain in her ribs. They already hold a grudge. At least this way, I'm not facing it alone. Jake nodded approvingly. All right then, let's go to war. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of activity that made Madison feel like she'd stepped into the middle of a military operation. Jake introduced her to key members of the Iron Wolves, each of whom brought specific skills to their unconventional approach to justice. Tommy Ghost Rodriguez was a thin, nervous-looking man who turned out to be a computer genius capable of hacking into systems that should have been impenetrable. He'd already begun researching the Romano family's business dealings, uncovering connections to several questionable enterprises that operated in legal gray areas. Marcus Bull Thompson was built like his nickname suggested: massive shoulders, scarred knuckles, and a presence that made people automatically step aside. But when he spoke, his voice was surprisingly gentle, and Madison learned he'd been a social worker before joining the club. Danny Wheels Chen was the youngest member present, probably not much older than Madison herself. His specialty was surveillance and reconnaissance, and he'd already begun photographing Romano family members and documenting their daily routines. The key to this whole operation, Jake explained as they reviewed Danny's photographs, is making Vincent believe he's in control right up until the moment he realizes he's not. Madison studied a picture of Vincent leaving what looked like an expensive downtown restaurant. Even in the photograph, she could see the arrogance in his posture, the entitled way he moved through the world as if it existed solely for his benefit. How do we do that? By giving him exactly what he thinks he wants, Jake said. Vincent attacked you because he believed you were powerless. He's going to discover that appearances can be deceiving. Tommy looked up from his laptop. I've got something interesting here. Vincent Romano Jr. has been using his father's restaurant as a front for money laundering. Small amounts, but consistent patterns that the IRS would definitely be interested in. That's good for leverage, Jake mused, but it's not personal enough. Vincent needs to understand that what happened to Madison has consequences beyond legal trouble. Marcus cracked his knuckles thoughtfully. What if we arrange a meeting, somewhere Vincent feels safe but where we have the advantage? He'd never agree to meet with Madison, Danny pointed out. Not after what happened. Madison had been listening to the planning session with growing unease. These men were clearly experienced at this kind of operation, but she was beginning to understand that their version of justice might be more extreme than she was comfortable with. What exactly are you planning to do to Vincent? She asked. The room fell quiet. Jake turned to face her, his expression serious. Madison, Vincent Romano hurt you in ways that go beyond the physical injuries. He tried to steal your sense of safety, your confidence, your belief that justice exists in this world. So, so he's going to experience what it feels like to be powerless. He's going to understand what it means to be afraid, to feel vulnerable, to wonder if someone is going to hurt him and get away with it. Madison felt a chill run down her spine. You're talking about torturing him. I'm talking about education, Jake corrected. Vincent has never faced real consequences for his actions. He's never felt genuine fear or helplessness. It's time he learned what those emotions feel like. And if he goes to the police? Jake's smile was cold. With what evidence? Vincent Romano, upstanding citizen, claiming he was threatened by a motorcycle club. Even if the police believed him, what could they prove? Madison realized she was in deeper than she'd initially understood. The Iron Wolves weren't just offering to help her report Vincent's assault. They were offering to balance the scales of justice in ways the legal system never could. I need some air, she said, standing abruptly. Jake nodded understandingly. Take all the time you need. This is a big decision, and it has to be yours. Madison stepped out onto a balcony that overlooked the club's compound. The morning sun had burned off most of the previous night's storm clouds, and the day was shaping up to be crisp and clear. She could see the city skyline in the distance, including the downtown area where Vincent Romano was probably eating breakfast and planning his day, completely unaware that his actions had set larger forces in motion. A soft footstep behind her announced Maggie's presence. The older woman joined her at the balcony railing, offering a fresh cup of coffee without saying anything about Madison's obvious internal struggle. Is this how it always works? Madison asked after several minutes of comfortable silence. What do you mean? Someone gets hurt, they come here, and the Iron Wolves decide to take matters into their own hands. Maggie considered the question carefully. Not always. Sometimes people just need a safe place to stay while they figure out their next move. Sometimes they need help navigating the legal system or finding resources they didn't know existed. But sometimes the legal system fails, and good people suffer while bad people face no consequences at all. Maggie's voice carried years of experience with disappointment and injustice. When that happens, someone has to step up and balance the scales. Madison thought about the 3 other women Vincent had assaulted, women who had been silenced by threats and intimidation. What happened to them? Vincent's other victims. I don't know about all of them, but I can tell you about Sarah Mitchell, the waitress from the restaurant Vincent's family used to own across town. Madison turned to face Maggie directly. What happened to her? Sarah reported Vincent's assault to the police. She had witnesses, medical evidence, everything you're supposed to have. But Vincent's lawyers got to her before the case went to trial. They offered her money to drop the charges, and when she refused, they started threatening her family. Did she give in? She held out for 3 months. Then someone broke into her apartment and left pictures of her little sister walking to school. That's when Sarah disappeared. Madison felt sick, disappeared, moved away, changed her name, started over somewhere else because she was too afraid to stay here. Maggie's expression was grim. That's what Vincent Romano's idea of justice looks like, terrorizing women into silence and exile. The weight of the decision Madison faced suddenly felt enormous. If she walked away now, Vincent would continue hurting women, confident that his family's wealth and influence made him untouchable. But if she stayed and participated in whatever the Iron Wolves had planned, she would be crossing lines she'd never imagined crossing. "What would happen to me afterward?" she asked. "After whatever you're planning is finished?" "That depends on you," Maggie said honestly. "Some people find that taking control of their situation helps them heal from trauma. They discover strength they didn't know they had. And others find that revenge doesn't heal the wounds they thought it would. They realize that becoming someone willing to hurt others, even people who deserve it, changes them in ways they didn't expect." Madison appreciated Maggie's honesty. Too many people had tried to tell her what she should feel or how she should respond to her assault. The Iron Wolves were offering her a choice, but they weren't pretending the choice was simple or without consequences. "How long do I have to decide?" "As long as you need," Maggie assured her. "But understand that Vincent isn't going to stay idle. Men like him don't like leaving loose ends, and you represent the biggest loose end in his life right now." As if summoned by Maggie's words, Jake appeared in the doorway. His expression was serious, and Madison could see tension in the way he held his shoulders. "We've got a problem," he announced. "Danny just spotted Romano family muscle asking questions around your apartment building. They're looking for you." Madison's blood ran cold. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that suggest Vincent isn't content to let sleeping dogs lie," Jake replied grimly. "They're trying to find out where you work, where you go to school, who your friends are." "They're building a target list," Maggie said, her voice hard with anger. Madison thought about her few close acquaintances from college, decent people who had nothing to do with any of this, but who might become collateral damage in Vincent's campaign of intimidation. "We have to warn them." "Already on it," Jake assured her. "But Madison, this changes things. Vincent has decided you're a threat that needs to be eliminated one way or another. Staying passive isn't an option anymore." Madison looked out over the city where Vincent Romano felt free to hunt her like an animal, and something cold and determined settled in her chest. She thought about Sarah Mitchell, forced to abandon her entire life because she dared to seek justice. She thought about the hotel maid and the college student, women whose names she didn't even know, but who had suffered the same violation she had. "What's the plan?" she asked, turning back to Jake. Jake's smile was sharp and predatory. "We're going to give Vincent Romano an education he'll never forget." The plan Jake outlined was more sophisticated than Madison had expected. It wasn't the crude revenge fantasy she'd feared, but a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to systematically dismantle Vincent Romano's sense of security and privilege. Phase 1 is information gathering, Jake explained as the core team gathered around the main table. Tommy has already identified vulnerabilities in Vincent's routine. Danny has been documenting his movements. We know where he goes when he goes there and who he associates with. Tommy pulled up a detailed schedule on his laptop screen. Vincent follows the same pattern almost every day. Gym at 7 a.m., breakfast at Martinelli's Cafe, office by 9:30. Lunch is usually at one of 3 restaurants, all owned by his family. Evenings vary, but he has standing reservations at several upscale establishments. "The beauty of privileged people," Marcus observed, "is that they're creatures of habit. They feel so safe in their little bubbles that they never consider the possibility of being vulnerable." Madison studied Vincent's schedule with growing understanding. He never varies his routine because he never has to worry about being followed or targeted. "Exactly," Jake confirmed. "Vincent Romano has lived his entire life believing that normal rules don't apply to him. He's about to learn otherwise." Danny spread out a series of photographs showing Vincent at various locations throughout the city. "The interesting thing is how isolated he keeps himself. Despite being part of a big family, Vincent usually travels alone or with just one bodyguard." "Bodyguard?" Madison asked, concerned about the implications. "More like a driver who looks intimidating," Jake said dismissively. "Frank Castellano, 62 years old, has a bad back and probably couldn't catch a determined jogger, let alone handle real trouble." Tommy continued clicking through screens of information. "Here's where it gets interesting. Vincent has been seeing a therapist twice a week for the past 6 months." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Madison felt a spark of something that might have been hope. "He's in therapy." Dr. Amanda Walsh, psychiatrist specializing in anger management and impulse control disorders, Tommy read from his screen. Vincent was court-ordered to attend sessions following a bar fight last year that his daddy couldn't make disappear. Jake leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Court-ordered therapy suggests Vincent has anger control issues that go beyond what happened to Madison. It also suggests he's been in trouble before, and that someone in the legal system has already identified him as a problem, Marcus added. Madison felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. If Vincent is already known to have anger and impulse control problems, and if there's documentation of previous incidents, then your assault fits into a pattern that can't be easily dismissed or covered up, Jake finished. Especially if we can connect it to his other victims. Tommy's fingers flew across his keyboard. I'm accessing Dr. Walsh's appointment system now. If we can document Vincent's therapy sessions and cross-reference them with known incidents. Wait, Madison interrupted. Are you hacking into his therapist's files? That seems wrong on multiple levels. Jake turned to face her, his expression serious. Madison, Vincent Romano has spent years hiding behind legal technicalities and family connections while he hurt innocent people. Sometimes you have to bend the rules to expose someone who's been breaking them with impunity. But his therapy sessions are confidential. Even if he's a terrible person, he has a right to privacy in that setting. Does he? Marcus asked bluntly. What about your right to safety? What about the rights of his other victims? Madison found herself in the uncomfortable position of defending Vincent's privacy rights, while surrounded by people who were trying to help her seek justice. I understand what you're saying, but if we become the kind of people who violate others' privacy and confidentiality, how are we any better than he is? The room fell quiet. Madison could see the other club members exchanging glances, and she wondered if she just alienated the only people willing to help her. Finally, Jake nodded slowly. You're right. We don't violate therapy confidentiality, even for someone like Vincent. Tommy looked disappointed but closed his laptop without protest. So what's the alternative approach? We focus on what Vincent does outside of therapy, Jake decided. His business dealings, his social activities, his interactions with women who might be willing to come forward if they knew they weren't alone. Madison felt relief wash over her. Whatever else happened, she didn't want to compromise her own moral standards in pursuit of justice. There's another angle we haven't considered, Danny said quietly. What if we approach this from Vincent's family's perspective? What do you mean? Jake asked. Vincent's behavior is a liability to the Romano business empire. His assaults, his drinking, his anger problems, all of that reflects badly on the family reputation and potentially exposes them to legal action. Madison began to see where Danny was heading. If Vincent's own family saw him as more of a problem than an asset, they might be willing to deal with him themselves, Marcus finished. Rich families hate public scandals more than they hate